Fresh from the showcase here at SwissWatchExpo, today we have an absolutely classic watch. Omega loves their brand so much they made an homage watch to themselves. So let's check it out. We all know about the Seamasters, the Speedies, and even the Planet Oceans for some of the more casual Omega fans out there. But for their dress watches, they definitely fly under the radar, and a lot of these are very, very deep cuts. This is one of them, mainly because it's a very limited production watch. And it's very unlike anything you might be familiar with because this is an homage watch to a very classical era of Omega in a couple of ways. But let's go ahead and talk about the watch itself first. This is a very simple, but it can be deceptively complicated in the dial, 36 millimeter rose gold dress watch. They call it the Renaissance. And as you can tell, this is old school in so many ways, and especially not what you would expect from a brand like Omega, who's known for their chronographs. Even when you think of a vintage Omega, you are probably thinking of a moon watch, which is very different from something like this. This is 36 millimeters, squared off case, straight lugs, very long relative to the case of the watch, and 36 millimeters, which for a very classic dress watch is a little on the big side, but I think it is great for a versatile watch today if you were looking for a dress piece in rose gold. At first glance, you may think this looks a bit like a constellation, but it is not. It is considered part of their museum line, or the Renaissance is what they're specifically calling this. The dial, while it does have a couple of different finishes on it, is not stepped, and this crystal is not domed. It is flat. So the shape of this case is very classic, a lot more squared off than something like a constellation, which makes it very different from the dress watches Omega is making now. One of the things that's really special about this one is this beautiful sunbrushed color of this rose gold here. This is very classic, not a lot of contrast between the case and the dial, although you do get more of a high polish finish on this track around here and with the Roman numerals that are intermittently placed around the dial here too. And of course on the subdial for the seconds hand as well. So you do get a little bit of dynamic sort of difference there in the finish, but this is again very much a classic watch. Great if you're looking for an old school style. And if you are, you probably haven't considered a lot about Omega. Now, I don't often talk about movements, but that is really what makes this watch special. And luckily for all of us, Omega has blessed this watch with an exhibition caseback to show it off. And this is what makes this truly special and very much an homage piece, because this is a caliber 269 movement. And you may even be able to tell just by looking in here. Not only is this an old school watch, this is a very old school movement too. This is actually considered a new old stock from types of movements that they've kept around since the 1940s. This is a very, very classic manual winding caliber, and that's even apparent if you're familiar with watches or look at movements a lot, even if you're not a watchmaker. You could definitely tell this is a lot more simple than anything you're going to find in an exhibition case back in your Seamasters or your Speedies or anything like that now. And that really goes to the charm of the watch. You got these, you know, the big plates here, you've got the spring bars, you've got the large gears here that definitely looks like an old school movement. And that's going to set it apart from these older dress pieces and even older Seamasters that used to have this movement, simply because those watches didn't have sapphire crystals on the case back. So unless you were actively working on the watch or having it taken apart, you'd never be able to appreciate that movement like you would with this one. And that's what makes this really special if you're a fan of old school watchmaking or just old school watches in general, because an exhibition caseback like this is not really something you're going to get on anything else in its class. This is a limited edition to 1,894 pieces, which I completely forgot to say. This is considered the Renaissance 1894 because they introduced this for the 100-year anniversary of the founding of the Omega brand. And I don't believe this watch itself was made in 1994. This definitely came out much newer, but that was sort of the introduction to the brand. And this particular reference was limited to 1,894 pieces. And you do see that etched around the edge of this sapphire case back here in green of all things, which I think is an interesting choice, but it definitely adds a little touch of character. And even if you're not a fan of the green, the best part about it being on the case back is you don't have to look at it all the time when the watch is on your wrist. Now, of course, if you have more modern tastes or a bit more sporty taste when it comes to Omega, I don't blame you. I kind of do myself for the most part, but luckily we've got the biggest selection online. So you need to drop us an email, like and subscribe to this channel if you haven't yet, because we are dropping new stuff every week at SwissWatchExpo.com.